today's project, this thing. Retina IIIc, small c. This one is here as a parts or repair project for me. Let's have an inspect. Let's see what's wrong with it. I know some of the things that are wrong with it. We'll start with the appearance. Let's have a look at this. So it's sort of like a blister here. These are Zeiss bumps. Means there's corrosion underneath the leatherette. I very rarely have anything to do with this leatherette patch on the front of these cameras because it folds in multiple directions. It's not a flat piece of leatherette, it's stretched, it's shaped. That means that once they're glued on there, they're very, very hard to get off in one piece because there's just too much resistance. The leatherette won't peel neatly back anywhere. You could sort of peel the centres out of these flat panels here, but this part round the corners, it's just impossible. You only peel the leatherette off if you've got another piece of leatherette to replace it with, and that's no joy either. So the leatherette on the front, we've got a few bubbles there, Zeiss bumps. Now this corner is missing, the leatherette's missing there. Most likely it's peeled up and someone's caught their finger on it and pulled it off accidentally. I'm not suggesting anyone did that intentionally. The back of the camera, with the lights casting across the back of that leatherette, you can see that we have a neat pattern of bumps on that leatherette, and I can see that it's cracked. The peak of those bumps are all cracked. That tells me that the leatherette was basically very well stuck, but corrosion has formed where these rivets are underneath the plate, and that corrosion has pushed up the leatherette on those spots. Now, because it appears that the leatherette is very well stuck, it means that that distortion was very much localised, and so the leatherette has now failed at those spots. So we have corrosion on the back plate here, and that's what's giving us our Zeiss bumps. Now there are lots of them. I don't like the look of that. Now, the base of the camera. The leatherette here is loose. All the way along there, that leatherette is loose. It seems to be stuck reasonably well at the back face here. Now you'll see that there's a rectangular shape here, quite sharp corners. Almost certainly it's had a label stuck there, probably someone's name, probably a label made with one of those label making machines that embossed the letters on the label. The glue has stuck very well to the leatherette, and some bright spark has decided they'll peel that off, and as they've peeled it off, they've taken the top off the leatherette all the way along here. So that leatherette it's pretty badly damaged. If I wanted to reuse that, I would have to cut a patch into that. I don't like my chances of doing that in an even vaguely invisible way, but it possibly could be done. So we'll carry on with the inspection while we've got it this way up. The back catch cover here feels a bit rough. It's certainly catching on the button, which means one of two things. The button is either slightly loose, so it's risen up underneath this, or this has been bashed down on the ground and is, as a result, is catching on the button for that reason. But it does work. It does feel like the spring's in the right place. Leatherette on the patch, cracked right at that point there on the corner. That's not particularly significant. It's possibly just damage from when it was removed to do a repair some stage in the past. Other things. Well, something that you can't see, but I already have the answer to, is the exposure meter. The exposure meter is slightly insensitive to light. It's at least a stop out, possibly more. When they're that far out, the chance of the meter being fairly accurate across its range is small. The output of the cell is just not putting out the appropriate amount of current to drive that meter cell at all times, and so it means that you could change your ISO speed on the meter so that it reads apparently correct at one light setting, but in different lighting conditions it would no longer be apparently correct. So it's not something you can easily overcome just by swapping your ISO setting from ASA 200 to ASA 100 and think you're going to go away laughing. It doesn't work like that. So we know the meters are dud. This isn't here because of these problems. They weren't mentioned. This is here because the shutter doesn't work. And the shutter doesn't work because the shutter doesn't cock. And the shutter doesn't cock, I know, because the shutter cocking rack is stripped. Now the person this came to me from had bought this camera. They thought they were buying a good going camera. Turns out the shutter never fired for them once after it arrived. Let's remove the top cover and have a look at this cocking rack. I'll start by opening the back of the camera, put something through the fork of the rewind, spin the rewind off, remove that. Two screws, one here, one here. This is the incorrect screw. That screw has been swapped with something else. That's too big. That's not the original screw. That's interesting in its way. Let's remove these two screws. One screw here at the end of the top cover. Now the symptoms of this, I haven't tried the film advance on this because I've already been told the rack's, I've seen pictures of the rack and know that it's stripped. Let's lift this top cover off carefully. We'll take the screws out that hold the meter in place. Here's our meter removed from the camera. Now you will see here that these teeth are not exactly in a useful alignment there at all. We've got tooth to tooth instead of crest to trough. So that's obviously wrong. And the teeth here are very damaged at this point. They're sort of still present, but only just. That one feels like it's rolled over. And this one here is definitely rolled over. Now when they're rolled over like that, it means that someone has probably, when it's come to the end of its stroke, because this timing's incorrect, the arm has been sticking out and someone has helpfully pushed it back to the rest position, which would have finished off that tooth there. Let's have a little look further and see what we can see. Now if you're playing with a Retina IIIc or a 2C or a 1B, you have to be aware of this shutter release shaft here. If you let that fall out of the camera by tipping it on its head, there are there's three bad things that can happen from that. The shaft here may have a return spring down in here. I'm having a look to see if I can see one. This one doesn't have one. Does that mean it never had one? Not necessarily. Sometimes they get lost. The shaft also could be a two-piece. It may have an extension on it. And if you pull it out, let's lift this one out, see what we see. Now this appears to be all one piece. So we're safe from that regard. Sometimes they have a spacer washer on the shaft right here. And that helps correct for the fact that things weren't really machined correctly when they made the things, and so that it wasn't quite as enough push, if you like, when you pressed the shutter release. In this case, we don't have that problem. There's another problem that you can have though. This shaft, I'm going to pop it back in place before I have the problem, passes through something called the sleeve. Now the sleeve is a tubular shaped thing with an arm on it, and that arm on the tubular shaped thing presses against the shutter release here, which in turn presses on the release of the shutter itself. If you lift this shutter release shaft out, or if you allow it to fall out, that sleeve can take the opportunity to drop back into the space between the shroud here and the bellows. And of course there's no way of getting that thing back into position once it's done that. You can't even see it. You've got to strip the camera right down to get near it. And if that happens, yes, you're in real problems. The only way around that is you're going to have to remove all of this from the top, remove the leatherettes from the base, remove the 4 screws that hold the shroud in place here, after you've removed the shutter and so forth, and focus group from the focus mount from the camera. Anyway, that's not our problem today. We're just interested in having a closer look at this cocking rack here. So I'm going to remove this screw. That's loose. There's a spacer washer under there, a shim. Sometimes you'll get shims, sometimes you won't. It's where there's, it allows more freedom of movement, if you like, for the rack, where it might otherwise be rubbing on this bracket here. Sometimes you need them, sometimes you don't. So, let's have a look at this. Can we see anything from the top? I'm checking this screw. This screw here is the shoulder post. It supports the rack on this side to keep the rack in close contact with the teeth on the top of the shaft here. So a common cause of failure of the cocking rack is where this screw is loose, and so it's not supporting the rack, and so the rack can drift away from the gear so that the contact is only held by the tips of the teeth, in which case, well, you see the tips of the teeth are a little bit narrower than they are 2/3 of the way down the stem, and they just round off. This doesn't appear to be loose. Are there any other likely causes of rack failure at this point? Sometimes if this screw is loose, it is loose. See how loose that came loose immediately just with my tweezers? It should not have come loose with my tweezers. If that screw is loose, it means that this little gear here on the top will float a little bit. There's always going to be a little bit of play for that gear on its squared top of the shaft, and if it's allowed to move, it definitely will. And so you end up with more space between the gear and the rack at that point. In this case, you know, that's an obvious possible cause, I would think. It's not the only one that we might find in here, but it's certainly one. Alright, I'm going to strip down the top part of the camera here, and we'll see what else we can see. I'll remove the strap plug at this end. I'm going to remove the rangefinder. I haven't looked through the viewfinder to see what it's like on this camera. It may be quite clear. In fact, I'll look out the window and tell you whether that's clear or not. No. No, it's a foggy mess. Looks like a foggy day out there through that rangefinder. It's actually, now that screw's loose. Now because that screw's loose, it means that the rangefinder was probably not firmly fixed to the top of the camera, and its accuracy, that loose screw was loose too. So there's no danger that even if that rangefinder had been clear, which it isn't, there's still no danger that would have been accurate. Let's just see if the arm moves smoothly. Yeah, it does. It even returns to the rest position. It's a little bit sticky, but not bad. Back to the camera. I want that screw out and that post. Once I have the rack out of the camera, we can check the film advance and see if the film advance seems to move. Let's take that screw out. Now this post here, that has a disc formed on the shaft at this point, flattened off on two sides so you can engage a tool. And the tool I use is this one, which used to be a screwdriver. So I bored a hole up the middle of it and cut a slot in it to engage with those two flats. And you can do that sort of thing with other things. I've made this tool more recently when I wanted something simple to do the same job when I couldn't find my other one. Let's take that screw out. Let's take that clamp out. Lift the rack out. So we already know we've got a problem here with that screw there being loose, so that part is not being held down firmly. I can remove that chrome trim. Let's see if the film advance moves. Oh, now I just pressed down that lever there. That lever is the lock lever. That's supposed to pop up and lock your film advance when you reach frame number 1, and it's controlled by this little cutout here. When that post is allowed to run up into that cutout when this reaches number 1, then the lever comes up, locks our film advance at the bottom, stops you being able to wind on. That is jammed. When it's in a down position, it's got no interest at all in coming back up. So that's a fault. There's no way the end of film lock would have worked correctly with that in that position. This post here, that's our release lever. Now the release lever, its job is when you press your shutter release, this fires the shutter, the tab on here presses on this, which releases your film advance lever to allow you to wind on for your next shot. That also should move smoothly up and down, and it doesn't. It's as sticky as. So regardless of the rangefinder and the fact that it's as fuzzy as hell and couldn't possibly be accurate, regardless of the frame counter, which couldn't possibly lock the film advance when it reaches the end of the film, this is a real problem. What it means is that when you wind to the end of the film advance stroke, this is supposed to pop up and lock the film advance. It doesn't. So that means that the camera could never possibly have worked properly. And if the person who, as he told me, he bought this as a good going camera, it was never tested. There's not even the slightest chance that someone had tested this thing properly. Alright, this gets more and more interesting as we go on. Let's pop that aside for a second Let's have a look at this rack. So the tooth's damaged on the end. That's from the film advance lever being helped back to the rest position. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teeth which are undamaged. One that's marginal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 teeth there. Now the position of those teeth on the rack, now that's where the maximum load is starting to come on in the action of cocking the shutter. Now they're damaged, they're rolled over. And they're rolled over in a fashion that tells me that the gear on the top of that film advance just pushed that away and it just rolled over those things like saw teeth. Alright, so back to this. We're not even going to get to test the film advance properly, are we? Yeah, see, at the end of the stroke, this should be popping up and allowing me to return to the rest position, and it's not. Yeah. So this is damaged. It's sticking for some reason, possibly dried grease. This in the same boat, it's sticking. We know the screw's loose here. We know this screw was tight. But what about its mate over here? These two screws, quite apart from this being a post which supports the rack, it's also a screw which holds down this bush. And the bush, of course, locates the top of the film advance. There's always some play in any mechanism, there's always clearance, nothing is ever absolutely neat. So if these screws were loose, and if this shaft was over this way to the maximum extent of its freedom of movement, then you would end up with too much clearance between the gear here and the rack. So let's see if this screw is loose. No, it's not. Okay, so we haven't got a problem with the bush on the top of the shaft slopping backwards and forwards. It's fixed. It might not be fixed in the right position, but it was fixed. It didn't tighten, those screws didn't tighten up by themselves. They've always been tight. That was probably always sitting in that position. What would happen? No, I'm not even going to try. I was going to say what would happen if I dropped a good rack in there and we saw what the engagement of the teeth are like and see if it can be improved. If I'm going to play that game, first of all I need to tighten that screw up there, I think. Alright, so here I have a good shutter cocking rack. Now I'll just drop that in position, and here I can see that when those teeth are engaged, there is too much play between the rack and that post there, the shoulder screw. And that means that there'll be rattle at this point. Just tighten that screw up first. Well, that reduced the amount of rattle fairly well. Can I improve on that? What would I be trying to achieve? Well, what I'll be trying to achieve is loosening this screw and pulling this shaft over, pulling the bush over as far as I can, so to reduce the amount of clearance at this point. We'll try that. That screw's very tight. That one wasn't. Just pull the shaft over. I'm pulling it towards the back of the camera here and do those two screws up. This may achieve nothing. It may already be sitting in that position for all I know. Just drop this rack back in. that's made very little difference, so it did make some. That, I'd say, would probably be acceptable. Yep, that's fine. So loosening this screw and this screw, pulling that shaft to the back, tightening the screws, has had the effect of bringing the whole gear further back so that the distance between the shoulder here and the gear is reduced. Now, this film advance will never work. Because this and this are both sticking, there's no danger it's going to work properly. So I'm not going to try and cycle this through its motion to see if this would cock the shutter. But that's interesting. So I'm quite happy that that arrangement would work well. And the biggest change we've made is tightening this screw in the centre. Tightening that up has stopped this from slopping around on the shaft, and it had the effect of reducing the amount of clearance at this point. I think that would work quite well if there are no other problems. We don't know that there are no other problems. It's possible that there are problems between the transfer shaft that runs across the camera and the shutter at the front, or indeed in the shutter itself. I think what I'll do is I will flip the camera over, remove the bottom trim, we'll take out these two shafts, clean them up, put them back. There's something wrong with them. Either the grease has gone hard and they're sticky from that reason, or they're bent. I don't really know which it is. Before I tip the camera over, I'm going to put a rubber band between here and here so that the shutter release shaft doesn't fall out and cause me even more problems.